Wow. Okay. Well, we had a great blog this week about cooking. A day in the life of Marlena, and we'll jump into that in a little bit. We had Snipe Hunter on Theory Forge this past Friday. That was a lot of fun. It was a really good episode, so you should give that a shot. I actually spent the week, I think, in the forums, which is a place I'm normally at, discussing PvP versus PvE. There was a little bit of forum PvP going on there, I guess, but I thought it was a great conversation. So people who are interested in what's going on in Revival, that's a great thread to pop into. Silkite, you want to say hi?
Sorry, it looks like we were having some sound issues that I was maybe
Yeah.
trying to get a
Sorry,
hold on.
that was me. I actually just realized I had OBS with my mic and you guys muted, so I heard you guys, but nobody else heard you. So, Diggs was basically saying that today that we had Snipe Hunter on Theory Forge this past Friday, and we were talking about a lot of things on that specific to Revival, actually, with him on. Even though it was a general discussion, we talked a little bit about kind of what the life in Revival is. We got into topics about what makes Revival a little bit different than other MMOs and how it's kind of embracing this specific type of game that a lot of MMOs haven't pursued in a while. So that was kind of one of the first topics we wanted to hit here today was before we dive into the developer blog and all the other stuff we had planned for today, we wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what the essence of Revival is, and whether you've been following this show for a while or whether this is your first episode. It'll be a good way for you guys to understand kind of what it's all adding up to be and what the developer's focus is, because I think we've gotten a ton of developer insight between the different times we've had them on this show, and then having Snipe Hunter on Friday for Theory Forge was very insightful into just because of the nature of that show, into what this game is in the context of other MMOs and game design in general. So we'll kind of open up there, and I'll kind of pose the question to the two other co-hosts here today, but kind of give me your thoughts on what you believe makes Revival kind of unique and different compared to other MMOs from a design standpoint.
I'm going to jump in real quick and say, so the cool thing about Revival is that it's old school role-playing, Lovecraftian horror, and all of those have like equal emphasis. Old school role-playing, Lovecraft and horror. Those are all the 4 or 5 major draws.
For sure, and it's not like, and I guess the old school here sort of refers to like the Ultima Online vein of things, right? But it's important to note, I think, for anyone who has experience with UO but hasn't read too much into Revival yet, is that it's not necessarily just making like UO 2.0 and then throwing in Lovecraft. It's much more taking the formative principle of UO behind where all those ideas came from for putting in the various different elements and mechanics that UO did have, and then combining that kernel with modern game knowledge and experience and design. I mean, we've had over 15 years now of things that people can learn from various games, and take that information, that knowledge, and sort of some of the development perspective, some of the perspective on how players interact with this medium, and then put it together with all these other things and try to make something unique, which is a meow. It's a meow, a massively evolving online world. So yeah, that's the abstract. That's the very, very baseline. But
Yeah, jumping right on to the end of that, emphasizing multiplayer, that acronym, multiplayer evolving online world, is their way of putting a testament to, that the real big facet about this game that's going to be different, aside from, in a detailed essence, the live storytelling, the whole game itself, even the non-storytelling servers, are trying to be geared in a way, taking a different approach to MMO AI, and I've always harped on, AI is, it's the weakest link in MMOs. It's the thing that holds all the other MMOs back, and the fact that it hasn't been innovated too much recently, in the MMO space anyways, is has been, hurting it. People get bored of this static content, and what the developers with the Revival are trying to do with theirs is, use some different systems to kind of make some dynamic elements where the world will adjust and shift based on what players do, and give a little bit of power in the players' hands to where, they're not just gaming predictable mechanics of leashing and aggroing and, questing hubs and all these different things that kind of just drive a certain flavor of AI that's just existed for ages. Even Ultima Online, I think, had pretty static, predictable AI, and what they want to do with some systems that they were working on with Rift in the past that didn't go into that game, and some other stuff, is just really capture a type of world that feels more alive than other MMOs. Not just in, the player has to do something always, but these NPCs are going to be able to interact with each other. They're going to be a part of the market. They're going to be able to, if you own a store, the NPCs will come buy stuff from you and have that item, and other players can come to that NPC and buy it. So they're going to be as equally a part of the story as players, which I think is crucial to, having an alive world. Because with other MMOs, especially ones, that do actually have a good job of making social mechanics where people, get to do things and be interdependent together, when they don't have AI that's a part of it, if the players are gone, the world feels dead. So that, I think, it's a big way of keeping this world alive regardless of what your players are doing, but is a very interesting concept. But we wanted to kind of touch on this essence of, that we all kind of think is this essence of Revival, of being this immersion based RPG focused, that's not just about the players either. It's about the world is immersive because the AI, the NPCs and all that stuff are interactive with you. So that was a big thing we wanted to touch on. So did anybody else have anything that they wanted? I kind of soapboxed a little bit there, but do you guys have any follow-ups on that, or any thoughts, other things you want to add to what everyone should probably know about Revival?
Go for it, Salkai.
Okay, so yeah, I would say it goes even further too than just the AI. I know that Snipe Hunter has said before, at least in IRC, and I think he said on the forums too, that between verisimilitude, yeah, fun word, and simulation, like real, actual simulation, that verisimilitude wins. But I want to explain that a little bit. So verisimilitude basically comes from two Latin terms, one meaning truth and one, actually sharing the same root as simulation, whereby if you can get something to look and to some extent feel, mentally real, you don't have to actually go through the work of computing everything behind it. So, if to explain it in real life terms, right? If I were to take, I don't have an apple with me, but if I were to drop an apple and the apple were to fall, right? By gravity, that would basically be simulation in a computer context. But if you had, something that basically makes the apple move, to appear as though it's falling by some invisible hand, like, if it's like a 2D plane, right, and you have, a little peg behind the board, and the apple is on the peg and it's moving down and accelerating, right? This would be verisimilitude, but it would be ideally a cheaper thing, from a modeling perspective in terms of system resources. Anyway, that was way longer and off what I wanted to say, but basically, the idea behind Revival is that it should feel real, or feel real in the game sense of being real. That everything should contribute to this. Everything ultimately is subject to what it feels like to play it, rather than our big highbrow ideas of what it should be like to build it. And so far, I think the devs have done a really, really good job of keeping that at the forefront of their minds, and constructing everything for the player, rather than the idea of what they want the player to do in some crazy hierarchical way. Take it away, Diggs.
Well, so one of the nice things about the AI that I like, and I think it's going to impact characters, player characters, as well, as the tagging system, which is similar in some ways to Storybricks if you were following Storybricks and EverQuest Next and Landmark, but somewhat different in some ways. But both NPCs will have tags that will be driving their interests, their objectives, um, and player characters will also have tags that they will be accumulating not only during character creation, but also as they are active in the game. That will allow the NPCs to know what their interests are and to allow them to respond and react to the tags that we have on us. And so that's part of what helps not only the NPCs evolve, but also the storyline evolve in addition. So as we start showing interests in the various skill sets like archaeology or cooking or whatever interests we may have, the NPCs will be responding to what we're doing in the game. So that's one of the cool parts. The other really cool part are the gold servers that will have storytellers, live storytellers, paid storytellers, and I think there's going to be several shifts throughout the day. So we'll have at least 3 shifts of storytellers. So storytellers online on the gold servers 24/7. That will be daily and weekly meeting to come up with storylines to help move us along. We were starting with 2 gold servers, which is the servers that the storytellers are on, Blackwell and Anakatha, but we just added a new one this week, which is called Garatul. So we now have 2 gold US servers and 1 UK gold server, or European gold server. So that's going to be fun too, if we can finally get back to those days, the old school days when GMs would actually jump into the game and help us out with some story.
Yeah, I think the GM storytelling aspect is interesting because like older games, EverQuest did it for a while, and UO did it for a long time with they had this type of DM GM guide type players that would actually interact with people, and a lot of times those were just players volunteering, and they were a part of the game and they were invested in the story of the game. A lot of them were actually role playing, some were just managing things, but that was a really interesting aspect, and I think what Revival is trying to do is capture it in a whole new way that's really, it's not just something that's tacked on, but it's actually integral to the way the game is designed, especially for those gold servers. If you're on those, the live storytelling team is really going to have a massive impact in how they can control, because the world is being built so that these GMs can actually control a lot of different things, track a lot of different information, and use players to actually guide the story instead of them always having to do it themselves. The storytellers can see stuff, grab you, or not grab you, but they can see stuff and they can plant stuff and they can lead you, kind of push things around or trigger things to happen around you, and it'll cause the world to react around players. So that is like another awesome element of gameplay that I didn't really touch on too much because it's not part of every server, but definitely I'm sure if if there's a high request, just like we saw this week, if there's a high request and people keep buying up the stuff on the gold servers, they'll make more. So if you don't feel like you got to buy the public server, just if you can't buy property, let them know and maybe they'll convert another one to gold, and more of this can happen, because I think this is really what makes the game like truly 10 times better in concept than any MMO that's come out, especially from an RPG standpoint. So, but we'll push forward into our next topic, which kind of what we've all been talking about so far, of establishing this immersion and this world that really feels alive to you and feels real, with more than just simulation. Being able to fake things to create the effect that the world around you is real. The developer blog that we had this week was on a cook, basically a day in the life of a cook, and it kind of used the example of one of the crafting, I don't want to say classes, but essentially it's a skill set, or what would be kind of like a class if you were to shove it into other MMO labeling, but it's basically a section of crafting that you can do. And cooking, the blog, for those of you that read it, was really interesting because it basically just, this lady, she's a cook, it talks about how she, is selling pies. They're pretty crappy. She wants to improve what she's doing. It talks about how she needs to gather different resources, how she there's mini games involved to affect the outcome of the resources and to affect how she's gathering even resources, to affect the outcome of the actual thing that she crafts, which in this case is food or fish pies. And she's able to do things even to those pies after they're crafted with more depth by making them better, making spiced pies. So there's a lot of depth to it. But another aspect that I really liked about the blog is it goes into, what else this person who's crafting this thing has to worry about, because you don't just craft stuff and throw them up on an auction house and people buy them like other MMOs. You've got to sell them somewhere. You've got to have a place where you can sell them, and if you're buying resources, you've got to have a place where you're buying them. There's not necessarily an auction house or anything, so you can go to the market, find stalls, buy the resources you need. You can go gather them yourself, or you can go to kind of like suppliers, like if you would go to a farm for a lot of herbs, crops, or something like that, you could get them direct from the farmer if you know that, or arrange with an NPC, and stuff like that. So it was really interesting kind of talking about all of this process, and then it even talks a little bit touches into the politics a little bit of how this cook gets, she wants to get kind of more prominence, so she talks about how maybe she wants to get her own place, kind of build up and get a storefront, get somebody to do her work for her, not do her work for her, but do the selling, the things she doesn't like to do for her, so that she can focus on what she likes to do, which is crafting. So that would require her investing time and energy to better her situation, get a bigger house where she has a storefront, and she can put employees, NPCs, or other players even, to sell for her and let her focus on what she wants to do. So it was really cool because it, if you read it in the aspect of, well, okay, I'll pretend I'm this character, and then you can start applying those things when you think of any other character you want to. So, but it was really cool. And there was some other stuff before and after the blog too. But for the other two co-hosts here, what were your guys' thoughts, first impressions about the blog, and what kind of thoughts did it inspire for you guys?
Well, one of the things I have to say about these blogs is we get a weekly blog, we get a ton of information in the blog itself, and then the people in the forums start asking questions, and we get a ton more details. So that's one of the great things, is it's amazing how much detail we have on the forums. It just sucks you in, and I don't know, it's difficult for me to leave just because there's so much information there. So one of the great things, the detail just in what a cook would go through, and what a cook would be thinking about in terms of wanting to gather spices, in terms of how Marlena, would want to improve her skills. Was just amazing. But some of the details we got afterwards, like it's going to depend upon your the utensils that you're using. It's going to depend on your level of skill. It's going to depend on the ingredients that you can find. It's going to change the quality. And then the minigame itself. So I think there's 4 aspects, and I can't really remember them all, but fixtures was one. So in this case, it was like the oven that you might be using, the type of pan you might be using, the spices you might be using, and then the main ingredients that might be going into the pie, whether it's fish or chicken. And there's some cool things that are going to be intuitive as you're trying to experiment and create new types of pies. One of the examples given was that if you're making a chicken pie, and you want to substitute something, it's going to make some amount of sense, like substituting poultry, a different type of poultry, turkey for chicken, might give you a new recipe, and it would probably be a fairly high quality recipe, since it's similar to chicken. But if you're using a chicken recipe and you substituted fish, it might not come out all that well. So that level of detail is just amazing. And again, like you said, trying to apply that to other professions just boggles the mind about what could happen.
You muted.
Sorry, I was muted. um, Forgive me. Anyway, so it was fixtures, spices, ingredients, tools, and then I think there's also an argument to be made for techniques as a fifth one. But yeah, I mean, so that's just for like, cooking, right? Assuming that you have, generally speaking, I guess as long as you have the ingredients, or well, as long as you have the fixtures and the tools, right, then you can make the basic dish. And assuming you have the basic ingredients, and then you can sort of swap things. Swap things in and experiment with different spices and stuff. And there's a whole tag, a component of the tag system which, compares spice tags with, a dish on a pre-made, or a predetermined basis. And then it says like, oh yeah, peppercorn's totally going to kick up this soup, right? Whereas, turmeric might ruin the soup, or what have you. So it's all very, very. Well, I guess it's very. Economical design, right? All the systems that they've already developed for other things, they can take that code and that design and employ it on parts of the game that you wouldn't initially expect, and I think to good hopefully good results as I think we'll see. But yeah, it's cool. It's real cool, and I think Valak, since I know you were trying to figure out what the word would be for Marlena here, I think occupation isn't a bad one. Like really, I mean, because that's what you'd
definitely
be doing in theory. I mean, it's or your character's occupation at least is to try to eke out a living or otherwise, depending on how high up things you go in the world. And I think that's very different from just your rogue profession system. Like, I'm a leather worker, man. I make patches of leather and I sew them into armor and all sorts of fun stuff. No, it's much more involved than that, and I think much more interesting than that and engaging, right? Because in like a WoW type game, you just have your recipes, right? And you make enough shoulder pads, and then you learn how to make these bracers, and you make enough bracers, right? I mean, there's no discovery to it. There's no experimentation. There's no sort of there isn't player agency, but to use a buzzword, in the sense of, this is what I already know, but I might be able to try this and see how it goes, right? Admittedly, it requires the devs to sort of think of everything, if you're familiar with that term, but so far they seem to be doing a very good job of thinking of at least quite a lot, and the rest can be covered just by time.
Yeah, and I think too, having community feedback, the forums have been quite a buzz, with really with all the players and interested people that have, even people that haven't bought in to the game yet but that are waiting, the community has given a lot of great feedback. It's pretty unlike most other forums that I've been a part of. I mean, when we were on the EverQuest Next forums very early on, it had this similar feel, but it's seeming to stick even longer here than it did when we were there. I'm not sure if that's just because I haven't been here as long. I don't know. The time is foggy in my head, but I definitely think that the community's feedback has been really amazing, and it's I wouldn't say that's just my own opinion, because I think every time we've talked to a developer, they've said that it feels quite abnormal to them having this amount of actual good quality feedback with very little filler or very little like trolling or complaining or other things like that. It's all been very constructive, I guess is the right word. So, but yeah, that stuff aside, I think that the game itself, the way that it's taking these occupations, that's a great term for it that you brought up, is the fact that your occupation is no longer like, hey, this is a subcomponent to what I am. Like in Revival, whatever you choose to be your occupation, that will be your occupation. You can have as many other hobbies as you could fit in, if you as many as you had the time for, I suppose. But your occupation isn't this plus combat or this plus warrior or plus this class or whatever that you maybe don't even want. Like, I think combat, or specific flavors of combat will be their own occupations. A bowman might be an occupation if it has enough depth in it that somebody can just master the skill of bowman, and anything crafting that's related to that particular occupation. You're basically creating, it's kind of like a create your own class, but you're creating your own occupation, and I think that lends itself perfectly towards the idea of you're creating your own character. your occupation is a part of your character, and largely in an MMO where you're playing a game, you're not going to the bathroom as this person. You're not. I mean, you're maybe eating a little bit, but you're not doing everything that this person would do in life. So generally, your occupation kind of is in a lot of ways what your character is. So you'll have some appearance stuff and some, the way you play that character, from I don't know, social interaction is the other side of it, I guess. But your occupation really is the non-social aspect of who your character is. So I think that's something that's interesting and really bends us back onto that idea of Revival being this really immersive experience to the point where you're not pigeonholing yourself into, okay, what class do I like best? What profession do I like best? You're just going into the game and creating an occupation based on what you enjoy doing, and like the blog showed, you may have to do things you don't like to do to help grow yourself, but there will be systems in the game to add some depth and hopefully get to the point where maybe you can eventually only do the part you like to do, and you can pay out the other stuff. And I'm sure there will be ways to, with a tiny cash shop, to pay to avoid doing the things you don't like to do, which is always good, help supporting the game. So, but yeah, I think it's really cool. And that kind of gets us into our next bit that we want to go into, which is a little bit different than what we've done in other episodes here. Usually we're talking about a specific topic and expanding on what we're seeing in the forums and other things, but this is going to be a little bit more creative. We're going to do something called A Day in the Life of Revivalcast, and we're going to kind of use the example of the developer blog, and each one of us is going to kind of do a round robin and give an idea of maybe a character we have in mind, or just something that we want to do in the game, or and expand on what we could do with that, or how we think based on our knowledge of the game how that could work out, or maybe even also what we would want to see the developers do, allow us to do as that type of character. So whichever one guys wants to start first, I guess I'll push it over to Diggs, because I know he has like 29 alts, and he doesn't have enough time to even think about them all. So let's give him some of the show to some think out loud on one of his characters.
Yeah, one of the funny things about this game and our interactivity with the devs is almost every time I learn something new from the dev, that just means that's another alt that I have to make, because I have to jump in on the goodness of the features that we're getting. So if I was going to go into a day in the life, I have a character that I guess she is she's in the cottage level of housing, so it's a really crap house. I don't even know if I would do the upgrade kit on that house, so I'd probably be doing the base level housing with her, wooden floors, wooden walls, slop bucket that she'd be putting her waste in. But I think her major profession, how she's making her money, would be pamphleteering and actually handing out pamphlets. So hopefully she would be able to partner with a journalist who's making the pamphlets, but she'd be the one walking throughout the various neighborhoods and spreading the propaganda, whatever the propaganda is. Fairly poor. She right now, I already know that she is going to be hanging out, having breakfast at Dema's Bakery. Yeah, just going from neighborhood to neighborhood, checking out what's happening in the various neighborhoods, trying to stay alive, even though she's, not a, rich person, not a wealthy person. And I haven't really gotten into how I want to delve into her madness or her politics. I have some characters who are going to be trying. I have one character, I think my main character is going to be trying to uplift Bastet's Rest from poverty to a more, clean up that neighborhood so it's a more respectable neighborhood. My main character, Diggs, is a doctor, so going to be looking at the disease-ridden areas of Crown's Rest and trying to cure those areas. And Diggs is going to be pretty heavily into the politics aspect, since I'm going to be wanting to make that neighborhood specifically more respectable.
Nice. What about you, Sale? First, is there any thoughts you have, Sale, on that character archetype? Like, do you see any problems there, or do you see anything really interesting that that character makes you think of as far as mechanics go?
Well, I don't necessarily see any problems per se, except for I had a real life experience with one such very character today. The borough elections and stuff are coming up on like the 19th of May or something, and so people are out and campaigning for various various politicians and borough council members and stuff like that. And so I had a 15-minute chat with one of those today. Actually, someone who was running for borough themselves about various things. Just harassing them back in a good way. But yeah. So I mean, short of if I wonder if people will actually be irritated by political action. In that way, like, stop knocking on my door, stop giving me these pamphlets, I can't even read, go away, just like something fun like that. But yeah, I mean, it could be all sorts of interesting. I mean, you would need someone who you would need someone to both write physically the pamphlets that you'd be spreading, as well as someone to hypothetically, design the pamphlets, right? Put it in language and rhetoric that's appropriate to whoever you're trying to convince of what, maybe depending on how far you want to go with it. And, you maybe run into conflicts with people trying to campaign against you and spread, the opposite viewpoint or policy, and, maybe get into some even shadier things, depending on if there's a, really corrupt part of society working against you. All sorts of fun stuff, right? But I think it could work. I think it'd be very fun.
Yeah, I was thinking when Diggs was talking about the doctor thing, you come around, somebody's sick, and you're like, hey, I've got something that can help you. It brings in that whole trust issue, like, because there probably will be people out there in the game. I saw somebody in chat mention the, drug dealer type alchemist. There might be people out there, like, trying to kill people in the city, so it's like now you're gonna have to, like, people are gonna have to find out who they can trust, who's the good doctors, and who, it creates an interesting mix of that's one thing I really like about this game, is there's this interesting underpinnings of strategy, and who do you trust, who do you believe, who's telling the truth, who's hiding information. There's this information, because of the hidden information that the characters aren't seeing, we don't have like true knowledge of each other. Like in another game, you'll see, that person, that you can inspect somebody. Oh, he's a paladin, he's this level, he's all this, you can see what guild they're in. In Revival, you're going to be able to hide some of that stuff, or some of it's not going to be readily available. So,
disguise is better way.
Disguise
some of that stuff.
Yeah. So, but it just adds a whole nother level of interesting stuff, another interesting dimension of play to the game. So, but Sailkite, what about you? Go ahead.
That poor character, by the way, will be using recreational drugs. So I've been trying to get some names from the devs about what those drugs might be called. So far, I just have confirmation there will be herbs, but I don't have any names yet. But yes, she will be using recreational drugs other than alcohol, if those are available.
Interesting.
And it can go farther too, right? I mean, Diggs might have a reputation as a good doctor, or at least I hope as a good doctor, right? But then someone could execute, a character assassination of, the actual kind, right? To ruin his reputation and force him into a very, very difficult, precarious scenario for trying to either redeem himself or, not get hunted down by people who think that, his concoctions hurt.
I was trying to figure out how indirect PvP could impact Marlena's cooking. So yeah, the indirect PvP and how we work that will be be very interesting with Revival, but especially for stuff that's as innocuous as cooking should be.
Definitely.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's plenty of things. One need only look at EVE and Market PvP and some of the drastic schemes that have been dropped all over that game to look at some really cool potential interactions that would go further than just than how they would in a game like EVE. Yeah. So characters that I'm looking at doing, I don't know that I would necessarily play this character, at least at the start, because there's other things that I'm more interested in. But I mean, I think a lending library could be kind of cool. Right. I mean, admittedly, there's already sort of the Brogheim, Abbey deal with, at least on Crown's Rock, that sect of Broghites who have access to all sorts of knowledge and books, records and history and whatnot. But then, for someone who's more public, I think actually there might be a bookseller already, but like, a proper Franklin lending library type deal, where you go home, you make a ledger, right, in your journal of, hey, I have all these books, right? Here's one on herbs and spices that I just lent out to someone who's looking to try to find some drugs or something, right? And then here's here's something else, right? Now, so I have a whole grid lined out of all the books that I've got that I can lend, right, to people and be like, hey man, you want to borrow this book on how to make a really really good fish pie? Go for it, Marlena. You take this book. You give me like 2 cents. You take it. Just a little collateral or something. You read it, you come back to me whenever you're done with it. You could start hunting people down if your books go missing for too long. You could do all sorts of fun stuff. You could try to acquire books, right? You'd hire the guy delving into dungeons and haunted mansions, right, to give you new books that you could lend out to someone, or maybe keep on a reserve section that you don't put on the public register. And maybe someone comes in looking for something kind of discreet, and they give you a little more than maybe they should, and you let them have that, but then you can still hunt them down later and be like, I need this book back, right? Someone's asking me for this. And so you can do all sorts of fun things like that. And that's even before you get involved with politics and people noticing who you are and all sorts of fun stuff like that. Or someone could rob your collection. I mean, it's just, pick a thing that could happen. And someone could make it happen.
That is really interesting, because I didn't really, we've talked about before, I think maybe it was the week that we had the blog on sex, and we talked about brothels being like a place of getting information because of certain mechanics. I feel like a bookseller, because we know books will be one of the main ways that we can acquire tags and stuff on our person. Finding people, running a bookstore would be a crazy information source. You'll be able to attach people's names to, unless they're disguising themselves, their names to what they're looking at, what books they're looking into, and you can start kind of running tabs on who's who in the town, who's doing what. I feel like a bookseller would kind of be like a great place to have a shady intel, like somebody just pays a book owner like to constantly, give them a copy of their ledger from a week or something so they can put names and books together, and it's there's a lot of crazy stuff in there. It's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. All sorts of fun, man. All sorts of fun. I don't know. That's one idea I was tossing around the other night.
Nice. You have any thoughts on it, Diggs?
How about you, man? You got anything?
Oh, for me? Oh.
Yeah.
For me,
yeah. It's a round robin, man. You need 3 for that.
As a writer, I have like a multitude of characters I would probably love to try in this setting and in this game. Character archetypes, anyways, or characters I've designed for other things. But for me, I know what at least what I'm going to start out with is going to be, and I may never leave just because it's always my favorite character archetype. But for those who have read Forgotten Realms novels, particularly the Legend of Drizzt, I love Jarlaxle. He's this dark elf that's against the traditional norm. He's not in the matriarchal society, and he's a complete opportunist, very independent, very self-surviving, self-sustaining. But he's also got this weird bit of loyalty to him, or some type of weird honor system to him that it's not like honor of regular people, but he does operate on some internal code. And I always thought it was such an intriguing pair of having this, nefarious type character that, is more often seen as a villain, but he does, work in this sort of some internal bent altruistic code. But, above all else, he is an opportunist, and he kind of takes people under his wing sometimes, so he's actually supporting a larger group of people beneath him. So, but for me, is applying that into Revival's setting and the mechanics there, I kind of feel like picking up a character and just being this ultimate opportunist that, maybe more of a drifter, somebody who doesn't really have a permanent home. Maybe a ship, would be my home, some small combat vessel or something. I think I'll probably lean more towards the combat arena, but I know ultimately I would just want, to participate in the combat enough to gain a reputation, maybe to where I can start dealing in politics as, somebody behind the scenes who knows some things about different people and is working the system a little bit to my own personal gain, but, also helping see the people I want in power get to power and stuff like that. Kind of, playing an overlord with no intentions of being a ruler of any kind. I just want to manipulate the environment and see what I can do to it, and just watch the show and enjoy. And if I make enough money, enjoy it from some luxury. But other words, I don't mind being having a tenement in the ghetto of Crown's Rock, and being right at home with the street rats. I find that would work with that character too. So it's a character archetype I've always loved, because I feel like when it comes to an RPG, and getting into a game and being immersed and exploring options, like an opportunist is like the ultimate question mark, because if your goal is to be an optimist, an opportunist, like, you're gonna jump on whatever thing comes your way. So you're in essence not even guiding your character anymore. He's guiding himself. You're just along for the ride. So I've always loved that concept. So it's one that I will definitely be exploring in Revival, probably early on. But it all depends on how everything shakes out as we get further along in the phases of development, and I see what looks the best. But that's definitely something I think looks fun to me.
Do you have an occupation in mind?
Really, I think I don't have one that I know is going to be like, I can rely on this to be steady income. I'm kind of thinking, I'll start out maybe with a ship, doing some escorting trade ships or caravans, kind of be like this mercenary for hire, just early on, enough to get enough money to where maybe I can, start investing in some other type of business where I don't have to. I'm not too, like, I like crafting a lot, but I'm not into, getting into the market grind and all that stuff. I'd rather be dealing with politics and combat, and especially, if I can get enough of a lifestyle going where I can just, play off of money that people are paying me for information I know on other people in the political realm, would be really fun. Especially when the world gets bigger, I would ultimately like to be kind of like a traveling ambassador type, that's this, like a spy or something, this diplomat that's a little bit on the darker side. So it would be a lot of fun.
One of the things I want to jump in real quick, the cool thing about how we're starting our stages and our interaction with Revival is the housing system. Many of us have bought houses already, and in these houses we'll be able to have our crafting stations. So that'll be a reason to have people come over to our space. That'll be a place that some of us might have a storefront from, and we'll be selling our wares. But it gives us things to do, active things to do in our house. But one of the cool things that I saw this week was about camping. Somebody asked if we would be able to camp in the game if we didn't want to buy a house, and the answer was yes. We'll be able to set up tents outside in the wilderness, and we might have guards stopping by to hassle us for, I guess, just setting up tents on land that's not owned by us. But you will be able to have crafting stations there too. It's going to be more vulnerable to attack than having a house in a city, but that's kind of cool thing too. You don't have to be in a house, and you can be a vagabond out in a tent if you want to be.
Nice. Well, we are pushing up. We started a little bit later, so we'll run slightly later. I think everybody here is able to go a little bit later. So, but we have a lot of questions, actually. You guys submitted stuff, and I actually even kind of mentioned in chat when we were talking about our class, our archetype character concepts, for people to just submit that as a question, and we could kind of like, touch on it and think about, what it might look like. So I'm going to start with one of those, actually, and Mother Rabbit suggested horticulture and husbandry she said horticulture and husbandry tags, but kind of that concept of a horticulturist lifestyle. What do you guys think on that?
Husbandry. That's always a fun one, man.
Yeah.
But horticulture, though, I can talk about horticulture a bit better than I can about husbandry just by knowledge. No, but yeah, obviously, anyone who's in the business of growing herbs, spices, etc., especially, I mean, this is actually a good tie-in on cooking too, will obviously have market reasons for interacting with the world. Whether that's black market or regular market will depend on what you're growing, of course. But there's definitely, at the very least, the logistical and economic factors of I have a bunch of rosemary and parsley, right, and I'm gonna go sell it. So everything from point A to actually getting it sold, and then taking that money and either reinvesting it or just living off of it automatically applies. And then I guess there's probably a whole set of mini games for cultivating plants and getting fertilizers and tilling the earth, things like that, depending on what you're doing, watering things.
When you brought up spices, it reminds me, or it made me think of the concept of when ultimately we get to phase 6 and we're doing stuff within the world, the larger world. But once the world starts getting bigger, once they start actually doing some like huge content additions, as far as like adding. The content will work differently in this game, but adding another area, like you add a whole other region, maybe that has another city. Just the fact that region, will end up being unique and maybe have some unique plants or different things of its own, unique locations or stuff. Like for a horticulturist, if some new spice comes out, that all of a sudden the cooks are like, oh wow, people want to, have things that have this ingredient. Now. You got to consider, okay, maybe do I move to that place and start sending back this way, or do I hire somebody? How do I get a hold of those spices? Do I order them? Do I buy them and use them? In it adds an interesting element that I think other games, they add content and people move into that area and consume the content, and the old areas become gone, or they become worthless or essentially meaningless. But in this game, adding something new is going to not only add something new for people to do and explore a new area, but it's going to add another level of complexity to every occupation that exists, in the known area, and it doesn't remove the known area from being a crucial to element of. And I honestly think too, when they add a new area, you'll probably get a ton of people that flock over there to see the new area, but probably depending on how dangerous it is or how uncivilized it is, you might actually have to rely on the places that existed before as hubs of operation to start doing expeditions into these places until it finally gets built up enough that it can. And maybe by then people are so bored with the new or not bored, but people have seen all the new place through all the expeditions. By the time it finally gets civilized, maybe they actually want to go back and keep their home in Crown's Rock and live there. So it's a really interesting, dynamic that this type of, deployment and this type of system kind of creates.
Yeah, I think in the skills list that we have, which will apply somehow to tags, we've got herbology, which would probably be closest to horticulture. We've got animal lore, we've got butchering and skinning as separate skills. We have farming, and we have husbandry actually as one of the skills that's going to be available. So I assume that means we'll definitely have tags associated with those. And there is a, Umbla mentioned in chat, there was a blog about animal lore, I think especially, that goes into a little bit of what kind of training animals would be like, and how we acquire those animals in the wild.
We've touched on this one a little bit, but Verde Manzana, I don't know if I'm saying that at all right, butchering, of course.
Green Morning, of course they would be talking about drugs. glean more?
Alchemist, potion, and drug dealer. I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe instead of going into what this character is about, how about what do you guys think if you were a character and you bumped into somebody that this was their profession? How would you interact with them? What do you think would, what part do you think they play in the world?
And I'm assuming I know it. Like, I'm assuming I know what their profession is. Like,
walking
in on them.
Yeah, like say you bump into them and they introduce themselves, or like, hey, they're obviously trying to make their business go, so they're like, hey, I've got some potions and stuff. Like, what is your initial reaction, and why? What about, how does that affect your game?
Be like, all right, what's it do? What are they gonna do, right? And then he'll tell me, oh, it's gonna grow my hair back or whatever, right? Because obviously I'm a bald. I've said it before, my first character's bald, but so it'll grow my hair, and I'm like, what? I can have a mane? But yeah. So then I'm like, all right, show me. I'm not buying it without proof, man. So,
what would it take what would it take for you to buy a potion from somebody if you had no knowledge of them? Like you didn't know whether you could trust them or not. What would it take for you to actually purchase something from somebody? Like, how interesting would it have to be? Or would you buy it and use it on somebody else? And I don't know. This just leads down so many rabbit holes.
But I think it depends on the character you're playing. You might have a mad character who just will drink anything, and that would actually be a cool character to be the sidekick of the apothecary, where he's like, I just made this thing. I'm not sure what it is. Drink it.
Right.
And I hope that we have some of that in there in Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. One of the cool aspects of their alchemy system is that you could experiment, and sometimes you would make a potion and you wouldn't know what it's supposed to do. All you know is that the thing you were trying to make didn't work, and you didn't get what you wanted, but it might have some effect on you, and you'd have to drink it to try and figure out if it was going to have a negative effect or a positive effect. And then once you actually imbibed it, then you know what it is from then on. So I hope we have some of those systems in there too, where neither the maker nor the imbiber know until somebody actually uses it. That would be cool. And I could come up with a character that would love to do that.
Oh, test sure, subject. Man. And you can do awful, wonderful things with that. I mean, like, if you if you make a batch of something and you don't know what it does, right? I'm thinking of as sort of my operative example here. If anyone remembers from Skyrim, the Hunting Brew Meadery quest line for the Thieves Guild or whatever, whatever, I forget whether it was Dark Brotherhood or whatever, but hey, I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna go slip it into my buddy's brewing vat, right, into his hops, see what comes out, watch the party where he's going to be premiering this new line of stuff, right? And then I'll know exactly what it does. And you can do all sorts of dastardly, awful, chaotic things with a mystery potion, right? Regardless of how you choose to distribute it. Or chug it yourself and see what happens.
Nice. On the topic of food and consumables, Lethality submitted a question. How important do you guys think food and other consumables should be for your character in Revival?
Say that again, I missed it.
How important do you think food and other consumables should be for your character? How much weight should they have? Or something, along those lines.
See, it's always super important, no matter whether they give you a buff or a debuff. Just for the role-playing, if the role-playing is part of the game, you have to have food and drink and be able to have animations that go along with it, because that's an essential part of roleplay. And when we have houses, to me, we need as soon as possible to be able to sit and also invite people over. Once we have other people able to come over to our houses, we need to be able to have dinner parties and invite people over for fun. I mean, those are essential role-playing to me.
I mean, gotta reenact that Virginia Woolf scene, man.
Sale,
sure.
I got a question for you here. Cersei asks, what food tags do you expect or want? I know you like the system stuff, so off the top of her head, she said, I can think of caffeine, helping a scholar focus, comfort, like a mini meditate. Health food helps fight temporal damage, things like that. What other food tags do you think could be a possibility?
That caffeine one's interesting. That I just want to say that, Cersei, that's a really cool idea. I wouldn't have personally, like, if I were going to implement caffeine, I wouldn't have done it like that. But like the idea that, if you had caffeine and then you're reading something, your tag acquisition, maybe it's fuzzy, but I don't know. That's something I hadn't thought about. That's cool. But food tags, yeah. Well, so part of it could obviously be, there's like the game buffs, right? Do you want to have things that, in a significant way alter your, improve your combat ability, improve your, whatever, wakefulness, improve or reduce the chance of madness, improve your ability with a certain skill or something. I mean, to be fair, I wouldn't expect those things to come out of particular dishes unless they're like exceptional, almost drug, laden dishes. But rather as a consequence of being well fed over time, having a balanced diet per se over time would be the things that would, do that. But I like the idea of a, of the after you, eat a good meal, right? You get the little status thing on the bottom in your text box that says you feel good, something like that.
I immediately when I think of tags, as a system in general, if you're going to start like using them for professions specific and stuff like this, I think the key thing that you can take advantage of with tags is no matter what type of occupation some person has, you want to have tags that are going to apply to or be useful to causing that person to interact with all the other range of occupations you have. So I always want to, and I think every occupation could have this, and using the food one as an example, having a tag that's going to affect and give benefits or bonuses or cause something to happen in all the different realms, from politics to combat to trade, to all and even maybe the more intricate specific occupations, having stuff like that way you create this really connected web of all these people having these reasons to interact with each other. So you're never getting this, I know it's a lot harder to do a system like that than it is to do like the Trinity or whatever, where this goes to this goes to this, and you only have a few connections. But if you can get all that interconnectivity, I think that's what turns something from a linear type of gameplay into something way more sandbox potential.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking about the negative impact. What foods do you not want to eat before you go to the brothel?
Garlic, man.
Oh,
never touch that
That's
garlic.
what I'm saying.
But yeah. So I suppose I want to just play around out loud with an example, right? So I don't know whether the various crafting or any other skill systems have something at this particular layer of the interface. But so imagine that for any particular skill there are certain things like the speed at which you do something, right, in a skill has a certain limit on it based on either input constraints or based on just the fact that for the sense of realism or the exact weight or feel of the thing going on, that it can't go too fast. You can't spin a spinning wheel too fast because your foot's going to cramp up, or your shin's going to cramp up and you're going to hate yourself for a month. So imagine then that if you take some caffeine or something, right, it raises that cap. And so but it would apply to any skill in any in any case. So like if you're doing, not that there's going to be watchmaking, for instance, right, but if you're doing something like watchmaking, which is very precise and deliberate, or whatever the equivalent very, very involved skill would be in the game, that going fast might not be good, right? Caffeine would make you jittery, or would make you overshoot something, right? Or bend a gem setting too far, or make it crooked or something because you're going too fast, and physically you overshoot what you're doing. But then for other things it might be useful, and that stimulant boost might be helpful, and that way it would be applicable to any skill no matter what. But it would not, basically my concern in mentioning something like that would be if you were to have, say every single crafting skill can make, a ring of +1 to all these other crafting skills, right? Or a drought of +1 to sword fighting or something, right? That's much less interesting, right? It's like, okay, did you pick up your +1 buff from all these guys? But if you have something that operates on a more subtle, mechanical, not immediately beneficial way or immediately negative way, punishing way, then it becomes much more fun. I mean, you could have contests where, like, you have everybody chug 15 gallons of coffee, right, and see who can make the best, shirt or whatever, right? It's just much more interesting if it operates at that level than at the, very at the surface, +1 to success level. I don't know, but I like interconnect. It's good. More dots on the network, always good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we're almost out of time. We'll do one more question here. I wanted to get one in from somebody that hadn't asked one yet, and so I have Trug42 here. It's one last food question, but that is kind of our theme for the day, food and life and the dev blog. So, assuming food and drinks crafted in Revival act like food and drink in other RPGs and offer buffs, do you think there will end up being one food to rule them all, that all cooks end up making ad nauseum, or will there be a lot of different options which are all viable?
Well, I know what I would want to be the answer. Or no, go ahead, Diggs. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say it's we're partially limited because we don't know what types, how many would be available. But for me, in a role-playing game, I never really go for the cookie-cutter stuff. In any case, it just depends on what I would be trying to make, and I would hope that our individual objectives would be different enough that there wouldn't just be one thing that everybody's gravitating towards. I mean, some people love cookie cutter stuff, so they might come up with something in, sheep or sheep. But I would hope that there's enough variety that it just depends on what you accomplish, what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, I definitely think that, a lot of the reason that people kind of get this, going for whatever is the most maximized, whatever is the most viable, market viable, is because a lot of these games kind of have systems that require, like, people to just farm income, farm gold, and so they just take the least path of resistance. So, but I think, if this game works out differently to where you really are just engaging in the way you want to play and the type of character you want to be, yeah, you're going to want to improve your life situation, probably most people are, and gain money, but, I think that there's going to be a lot of avenues to do that, and I think that the market, because it will be, like, so player-reliant in a lot of ways, that it's going to change so much. I feel like there won't be an item that can just, I mean, there probably will at some point, but I don't think there's one that can just sit at the top for a long period of time, it's like, everybody makes this because of this reason.
I want to jump in real quick. The other thing, when we look at the 4 different aspects, even just to cooking, where you've got ingredients, you've got the tools that you're using, you've got the fixtures that you're using, and the spices. I mean, each person might be more focused on one of those aspects. So it might be that somebody is a great chicken pie maker, and that's they have a tool that maximizes chicken, but somebody else is going to have, something that helps them maximize fish. It depends on, what your skill levels are in each of those areas. So I think it's going to be different.
Yeah, especially too if they have the mini games, that are specific to certain things. It's going to cause people who maybe find one easier or quicker to do than, to do that and make more of it than do one that's monetarily better but maybe harder for them to achieve a higher quality in.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this actually exists in real life, whether we think about it or not, right? But if you were to sort of gamify real life, there are certain, particular items that are better for certain applications than others almost universally. WD-40 is way better at unsqueaking your goddamn door than some water is going to be, right? Just categorically, it is the best, cheapest thing that you can get that does this thing. But in a game, yeah, I mean, I like situational factors. I also like the character creation aspects that could be involved with something particular like food, right? So if you come from a place that has a very vegetarian food supply or culture, and then you go to, Anakata, and you go to eat, goat meat, you get sick, right? So, whereas, a nice, roast spit of goat would be fantastic for a native Anakatan, it wouldn't necessarily be great for you coming out of not Fall Creek, but, wherever the heck, that has a very, for cultural or other reasons, very vegetarian, cast of mind. So, yeah, I mean, it's fun. There are definitely ways to make everything useful. You can totally, the storytellers can totally do potato famines. They can do, whatever they want. They can, they can make snake oil if they wanted and try to sell a bunch of snake oil. I mean, there's definitely ways to do it, but yeah, I mean, the only thing I can hope is that there will be enough stuff that is useful in enough different ways at different times that no one thing will matter. And of course, if different things do matter, then that's a market thing too. You can have, the current trend, right, is to use, whatever, coconut oil to clean your teeth, right? And then, next week it's going to be using, stalks of something that you cut and, scrape your teeth with or something. So it provides, market opportunities, and it's just more dynamic and perhaps more real to have, trends and fads and stuff.
Yep. All right, well, we are a bit past our time, so it's kind of weird. We came into the show, I wasn't sure if if we had enough on the plate for it, but now I find like we're ending a half an hour too short, it seems like, of what we could talk about. So, but thanks you guys for submitting lots of questions. We're hanging on to those, so in future episodes you might see a question that you asked in the past get asked there. So we're hanging on to all those. That way, if you submitted them, they don't feel lost to you if we didn't have time to get to them in a particular show. So, but we want to thank you guys all for coming for another episode. Thanks to my two fellow co-hosts here with Diggs and Sailkite on, and then Hylath again for filling in for us with her silent wisdom throughout the whole show. But and then in the chat too, we have Neurotoxin has been there hanging out with you guys. So hopefully you guys had fun with him. But thank you all for coming.
Sog is there too.
Sog is there too. I did not catch him, but thank you, Sog, for hanging out with everybody, and everybody who is there hanging out in the chat. I see a lot of names that I recognize, and a lot that I don't actually, too. So thank you guys for coming back, and for all you guys who are new to this show for the first time. We have past episodes on YouTube. They're only about an hour long, so they're digestible definitely, and they will go by quicker than you think, just because that seems to happen all the time on this show. We always run out of time, so. But thanks, you guys. We appreciate it. And we will see you next week with another edition. Ta-ta.
See you, everyone.